Hi everyone, my name is Savannah Lazera,
And I'm Aaron Martin.
and today we're going to be talking about how to level up your phishing game on modern platforms. So my name is Savannah, like I just said, and I'm a security consultant at Optiv, and I have my OSCP, and I'm the Hackbox Tampa ambassador, and I'm also an advisor for Reddit UT at the University of Tampa.
My name's Aaron Martin, senior security consultant with Optiv for about 3 years. Prior to that, I have 10 years experience as an information system security practitioner with U.S. military and various government entities. And I'm also an operator for advanced adversary simulation services.
Sweet. So a few of the things that we're going to be talking about today on the agenda is we're going to go through an introduction. We're going to go through the phishing phases, and then we're going to talk about how to set up a phishing campaign, and then we're going to answer any questions you do have at the end.
So we're just going to go into a quick overview. So most of everyone here has probably heard about phishing in some form or another, whether you're a red teamer or you work in an enterprise environment and have likely been a target of phishing. Phishing has come a long way. Its evolution primarily started with online payment systems and attackers registering different permutations of domains like PayPal, eBay, banking institutions, things like that, to steal bank account data from unsuspecting users. Things have evolved over time with implementation of multi-factor authentication in the modern corporation environment, as well as modern security controls like emails, spam filtering, domain-based reputation and categorization of domains. There are other modern security controls in place we are going to be talking about in this presentation. We also are going to be talking about how you can circumvent some of those security controls to have a more effective phishing campaign. Next.
The phases of a phishing engagement include open source intelligence, planning the attack scenario, building the infrastructure, and executing the attack scenario. So for open source intelligence, this is whenever you're going to be gathering information regarding the target that you are authorized to be doing this engagement for. And then the planning of the attack scenario is whenever you're going to kind of be tailoring whatever information you do find, and you're going to craft that attack scenario, such as the email that you're going to be sending out to the targets that you are targeting and that you are authorized to be targeting. And we're going to be talking about how you can set up your instance for the actual server, and then how you can register your domain, the DNS records that you're going to be needing, different types of providers such as Mailgun or O365 for your SMTP server, and then the HTML of your email, and how you can actually capture also multi-factor authentication session cookies as well through tools such as Evilgenics. And then we're going to talk about how you can send out the email and how you can actually test the email with a tool called Mailtrap. So we're going to be going through all of this information throughout the presentation. And so that also has to do with building the infrastructure, some of the things I just talked about. And then once you build out the infrastructure, we're going to be doing the attacks, executing the attack scenario. So this is whenever you're going to be launching that campaign of whatever you have built out for the campaign itself. And so depending on what you are authorized to do for whoever you're doing this for, you may be able to do post-exploitation, which we will also discuss during this presentation.
So gathering information on the target. So open source research is one of the most important phases for conducting a phishing campaign. So basically this revolves around a couple things. One, you want to do research on your target company. What sector are they in? Are they finance? Are they healthcare? Things like that. You also want to do some enumeration on employees. There's a ton of things that you can use for this. LinkedIn, Zoom Info is another good tool. Zoom Info and LinkedIn can sometimes give you job information about certain certain employees. So when you actually go to target these users in a scenario, you're tailoring it to what they actually do. So in this case, you wouldn't want to send a password reset request to someone in IT because that will probably throw red flags. Some other things you want to do are look at what is the permutations of domains that your target's using. So when you actually go to buy a domain or register a new domain, you want to make sure that you're assimilated with the URL naming schema, unless you want to go a different route and use something that's tailored towards your scenario and not necessarily the company's domain name, which both have that both have positive and negative effects to them. Also, it's important to purchase multiple domains when you're doing these campaigns, as it's common for one domain to get compromised and possibly blacklisted. That doesn't leave you dead in the water, and you still have a fallback domain or two to continue targeting during your phishing campaign. Next slide. Infrastructure. So here we're going to be talking about domain selection. So in the previous slide, I talked about identifying a company's domain permutations. So here we're going to be talking about domain selection. So you have a few different options here. When conducting a phishing campaign, it's important that you get a domain that is, whether or not you newly register a domain, it needs to be categorized in a timely manner. Typically, a minimum of 14 days is what some email spam filters will filter on. If a newly registered domain has been registered in the last 14, sometimes 30 days. So it's important to get that domain categorized. Another option is using tools such as this website here, expireddomains.net. What this is essentially is domains that have recently expired that are available for purchase. The benefit of this is they have built reputation over the years and are already categorized, which can allow you to purchase that domain, set up records for it, and you now have a reputable domain that has been categorized. The only downside to this is you're going to be selecting domains that possibly may not be tailored to your specific scenario. So you need to do some research into what sector your target company is in, whether it be finance or health or banking, anything like that, to actually select a domain that fits your needs and the target URL naming schema. So Fission Server setup, this is pretty straightforward here. Basically, you're going to be using any VPS instance of your choosing. You can use Amazon EC2, DigitalOcean, Azure. The point here is you just want to set up a VPS for your domain to point to for your newly registered domain. Also, the phishing framework that you're going to use, such as Evilgenics or GoPush. We'll be talking about Evilgenics later in this presentation. But basically, Ubuntu or Debian-based instances are fine. Some things you'll want to install, possibly Apache web server for actually hosting web pages that you might be using for categorization of your domain. Go ahead, you're good.
So the next one that we're going to talk about is the SMTP server. So the best way to think about this is that it is a mail server. So this is where you're going to be sending your emails through. So one that I usually commonly use on engagements is called Mailgun. So you can use Mailgun, or you can also, if you want to go a more manual route and bypass harder different types of email filtering, such as Microsoft ATP, then I'd recommend using O365 and sending the email manually on there. But in this case, this is the one for Mailgun. So the steps of setting it up, I'm going to go through, which is setting up, obviously, the account, which is free. And then you can add your domain into the Mailgun account. And then Mailgun is going to generate 2 text records. One is going to be the SPIF, and one is going to be the DKIM record. So these kind of validate the domain that is allowed to be sending these emails to people. And you need to add these DNS records to Cloudflare. And then once you do that, then Mailgun is also going to provide you SMTP credentials. So these credentials you're going to use for whatever you're going to actually use to send the email, because the server is, you're using essentially the Mailgun server or O365 to, they're going to be the ones delivering the email, but you still have to actually send it out. So those credentials are what you're going to be using to leverage actually sending it out. So make sure you make note of that, and you can use those for whenever you're doing the engagement. So like I said, this is free, extremely useful, and I definitely recommended it if you haven't checked it out to go ahead and look at it. The next thing that we are going to be talking about is Cloudflare. So I'm not sure if many people do use this, but I highly recommend using this on your engagements, because it just, utilizing Cloudflare, because it's used by so many different companies, it just adds more reputation to your domain. So I usually switch my domain from whichever registrar that I use over to Cloudflare. So you're going to be pointing the name servers, like in this example on the left here. And this is just an example from Google Domains of me pointing the name servers over to Cloudflare now. And then I usually add in a few CNAME records to associate with whatever type of scenario that I am doing. So in this case, these are a few of the subdomains that are going to be associated with the domain. And the MX records are a few of the records that Mailgun is going to be providing to you that you need to enter in to your domain, enter in for your domain on Cloudflare. And then the 2 text records that I was just mentioning, which would be the DKIM and the SPF records, which are shown on the right here. And then the last one is the A record. So this is where you're going to be pointing the server that you do set up for phishing, like Aaron was talking about just a few slides ago. You're going to be pointing that to the actual public IP of your instance. So this EC2 or DigitalOcean, whatever you choose, whichever platform you choose to do your server on, that's just the public IP that you will be pointing it to. And I generally would recommend proxying, like how I have under the proxy status. It's showing as proxying that information, so no one can directly tie it back. And then I'm going to go into the next one, and Aaron is going to be speaking on this.
Yes, so here we're going to be talking about creating firewall rules within Cloudflare. But I want to back up for a second and just talk about some of the security controls in place and the reason for doing this. So as I mentioned before, there's security controls in place such as URL scanning. Proofpoint does this, Microsoft Exchange Online Protection, as well as the O365 Advanced Threat Protection add-on. What they will do is when an email is sent, they will look through the body of the email. If there's any links within, it will actually click that email. Oh, I'm sorry, click that link. It's going to follow the link. More advanced controls such as Exchange Online Protection will actually see what the hosted web page. It will do code analysis on the hosted web page. So one thing you can do here is you can create firewall rules for these subnets that Microsoft has luckily made public, which actually allows you to block all those scanning IPs. So they actually won't be able to scan your link in your email to the web page that you are redirecting your victim to. One other thing you can do here is modifying Apache rewrite mods and HTA access files. You can use those same subnets I was talking about to, if you don't want to block them, you can redirect them to a valid web page. This will be done within your phishing server setup and your Apache rewrite mod, and then you will redirect those URL spanning IPs to a legitimate web page while your victim is being sent to the valid URL that you are trying to target them with.
So another thing that we can use Cloudflare for is to utilize the SSL certificate that is on there. So in this example, I'm showing where you can navigate to access that. So it's in the SSL/TLS little lock at the top in the bar. And then you want to go over to the origin server and then create a certificate. So the reason that you do this for your phishing site is that so whenever it comes up, it's going to be shown as this is verified by Cloudflare. So I think most people probably use, and I used to use this too, is Let's Encrypt for doing my certificates. But once I discovered this just adds so much more reputation to the domain whenever someone's looking at it, that it's just making it look less and less suspicious. So if you wanted to utilize this with Evilgenics, which is going to be talked about in the next slide by Aaron, you would copy over the certificate information with these two commands that I have shown. And you want to make sure you do this before you actually start setting up Evilgenics. Like, just make these directories on your own. And because if you don't, then Evilgenics is going to try to create it. And once Evilgenics starts trying to create certificates with Let's Encrypt before you do this, then it just creates all sorts of issues. So I'd recommend doing it before you actually start setting up Evilgenics. And then the outcome you'll see right here is that you have it verified by Cloudflare on your site.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about Evilgenics. So I mentioned earlier how multi-factor authentication is kind of somewhat thwarted the evolution of phishing in the sense that you need a second factor for capturing credentials is sometimes not enough when you're doing a phishing campaign. Luckily, there are tools such as Evilgenics that essentially is a man-in-the-middle framework for phishing multi-factor authentication tokens. Basically, the way it works is you will send whoever your target is what Evilgenics calls a Leer, which is an actual URL path to a page that you have set up that is similar to what you see here on the right. These are called fishlets. So you can mimic one of these web pages, these login portals, and essentially what you're doing is proxying that traffic from your target to the valid web page. And then the server side is being passed back through the proxy to the client, and you are intercepting that traffic. So upon valid authentication, including two-factor, whether that be SMS or any kind of second-factor authentication, if it is valid, you will then have a valid session cookies for that user, which you can then go and use various tools with Chrome that will let you import those cookies into your browser, and you now have that validated authenticated session for that user. So talked a little bit about the fishlets here on the right. These are just some of the fishlets that you can use. Basically, they are just YAML configuration files that have filters for what you want to actually capture and what you want to pass through from server to client. There's also the option for creating custom fishlets. Basically, all this involves is using a tool such as Burp to intercept a request. When you intercept this request, basically all you're doing is looking at that post data, that body, and you want to match up session ID, cookies, any valid authentication that is passed to the server you want to make sure that's captured. So that's kind of a way that you can write your own custom fishlet for if it's a web page that you don't see here listed. That is a way to customize your phishing scenario. So Evilgenics continued. I talked a little bit about Leers. So Leer is what's going to be created with your fishlet. So basically, this is what's going to be embedded in an email that you send to your target. When they click on that Leer, it's going to redirect them to a page that you have hosted. That's where they, here we have an example of the Aqua fishlet. So this is where the victim would input their credentials. That input would get passed to the valid website. That server response would go through the two-factor setup. Once valid authentication occurs, that user will be redirected to the valid website that you set up when you set up your redirect, and you will then capture the credentials as well as the session cookies for that valid session.
And before we go to the next one, I just want to add one more thing right here too. Whenever you do capture those session cookies, so whenever you do get access through this method, the first thing that we will typically look for on certain engagements is how to access their VPN. So kind of if we have access to their email, that's one of the things I'll go through. I'll try to see if I can find instructions to how to get access to their actual email or the actual VPN. And then from there, you can just VPN to the internal network of the company and start moving around laterally like that.
So creating an email. So here we're going to talk about creating an email. So when you're formatting these emails, it's best to keep it as simple as possible. You want to avoid putting large pictures or graphics in your body of your email. A lot of spam filters will trigger on HTML in the body of an email. So you want to keep it as simple as possible. Obviously, your Evilgenics landing page, that Leer that you create, you're going to want to embed that within your body of your email. Sometimes you can, if you're not embedding the URL itself, you can just use the URL without any reference tag, and that can sometimes bypass scanners. But then you're trusting on the target to actually copy and paste that correctly into their browser, which can be an issue sometimes. Also, your subject of your email, you want to make sure you're keeping with the scenario that the body of your email is going to be targeting. You don't want to use any flashy subjects like change password now. You just want to make sure that you're sticking with the scenario that that you're using in your email, as well as your sending domain. So your sending domain, whether it be IT support at the domain you purchased, all these come together when you're crafting an email to add to the validity.
So whenever you test the email, this is referring to prior to actually sending it out. There is a tool called mailtrap.io, and this provides feedback about how suspicious your email looks and the kind of rating an email filter would be giving it. So a lot of marketing companies will use this type of tool because obviously they want to try to get the emails that they're sending out into people's inboxes. So this kind of gives an actual score associated with that email. So as you can see, it's pulling in all different types of information about the actual HTML, the HTML source, the text, the spam analysis, and any technical information. But the screen that I have up here, which is under the spam analysis, is the most important part that you want to look at. So this will show if your domain has been blacklisted So as you can see in this one, it was not blacklisted at all. And the other thing that you can see here is the actual score. So in this case, the email that we were testing, it was a score of 0. So if your score is over 1.5, I would definitely recommend trying to go through and actually adjusting things in the email, like maybe specific words, maybe images that you're trying to include, or anything else that could be potentially triggering it. I know also if you were to include like a URL with a specific port other than 80 or 443, that also creates suspicion. Or if you have white text on an email that you're trying to blend in, that will also get flagged by email filters. So all those different types of things are accounted for from Mailtrap. So Mailtrap has SMTP credentials that you can utilize to, so instead of using, say, the ones from Mailgun that we had mentioned earlier, you'd use the ones for Mailtrap to just be testing that email whenever you're sending it. So you'd send it out using those SMTP credentials from Mailtrap, and all it's going to do is actually intercept it from actually being delivered to whoever you are sending it to, like yourself, to test the email. And it's going to be going through the spam analysis. But once you're actually sending out the real email to the real targets, you do want to make sure you switch it back to the Mailgun SMTP server to make sure it doesn't get intercepted by Mailtrap again. So I definitely recommend checking out this tool, because this is how you can make sure you have a successful delivery to whoever you're sending it to, and getting a good idea of how it's looking from the email filtering perspective.
Yeah, one thing to add. So yeah, we included Mailtrap in this because Mailtrap's a free tool that you can use, obviously, to test your spam score for your email. But another option, Exchange Online Protection, if you can get access to it, it has a ton of useful insight when sending an email. If you send an email to through Exchange Online Protection, you can actually see basically Exchange Online Protection uses machine learning and detonation-based heuristics. So it's sandboxing. If you send, say, a payload or attachment to a target, it sandboxes that payload, runs it in a sandbox environment, and sees what changes are made to the underlying system. So you do go the route of sending a payload to a target, this is a good way to see if it's actually getting by the initial spam filter and being executed and ending up in the user's actual inbox. So that gives you a little extra insight into if you go the attachment route and you want to actually send a payload to a target, that can give you insight into whether or not it actually lands in the user inbox.
So the next few slides are going to be discussing launching the campaign. So I have on the right here a screenshot, and there's going to be additional screenshots in the next slide of showing how I would utilize O365 to actually launch the campaign manually. But if you were to go the route of using, say, GoFish or Smitty, there's a lot of documentation online of how to use GoFish. We generally stay away from using GoFish on engagements just because there's so many IOCs that are built in to GoFish that it's just easier to either do it manually or use a tool called Smitty that's available on GitHub. So like I was saying, that these are the two additional screenshots. So if you wanted to add your domain to O365, you would add it in like this, like how I have it right here. And then you would associate a user to a license that you do have on your account. So once you have all that set up, it's very basic. After that, you go in with whatever user that you are planning on using, and you can go to that Outlook associated with that account and set up an email to test, and then you could test it on there. But like I was saying, if you were to use GoFish with Mailgun as the SMTP server, then obviously there'd be different steps associated with that, and you would use some of the things that we've talked about previously in the presentation. I just wanted to make sure that we kind of showed the audience how you can actually set up and add your own domain to O365 and utilize using it there. I would definitely recommend trying to use this in the future if you can, just because using O365 over a tool that's available on GitHub will obviously be a lot more reputable whenever you're sending out the email. Yeah. And then, so once you launch your campaign through whichever provider you plan to use, you're going to be waiting for their credentials and or session cookies if targeting multi-factor authentication. And depending on however you have your engagement set up at whatever shop you're at, you can perform post-exploitation. So this is varying from whatever is in scope for whatever client you're performing this engagement for. But if you can perform post-exploitation, I had mentioned this a few slides ago, that the first thing that we'll do is use cookie editor like in Firefox and then log into that account with that session cookie to utilize the multi-factor authentication. And then go through there, try to find sensitive files to kind of show the impact to the client. Also try to find ways to get access to the internal network, because most of the time, especially with everyone working remote, there is probably going to be a VPN connection somewhere that has access to the internal network. And then once you can get access to that, then you can laterally move around and show additional impact to a client of getting all the way from just sending an email into their internal network. And obviously that's not good. But yeah, so that's how we kind of treat the phishing engagements. And if anybody has any questions, I am available on Twitter or LinkedIn. My Twitter is LazSlayer, and then Aaron.
Yeah, my Keybase is Aaron_Martin.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us, or either of us, not any of us. Great. Thank you everyone for coming to our presentations. We are going to be having a Q&A. Aaron is not going to be available the day of the presentation for Q&A, but he's definitely available on Keybase to answer any questions anybody does have. Aaron, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thanks.